I stood in my own kitchen, watching my husband of 40, 2 years laugh with a woman I'd never met, and suddenly the smell of the roast I'd spent all morning preparing made me sick to my stomach. Because in that moment, I realized the celebration party he'd been planning for weeks wasn't for me at all. It was my replacement party, and I was the only one who didn't know it. My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 67 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was Bob Thompson's wife. I was Grace's mother. I was the woman who made the best peach cobbler at church socials and never forgot a birthday. I was the elementary school teacher who retired after 35 years of shaping young minds. I was the woman who ironed my husband's shirts every Sunday night and made sure his coffee was ready before his feet hit the floor each morning. I was, I believed, loved. It's funny how you can build an entire life on a foundation you never thought to question. Like a house built on sand, except you didn't know it was sand, because you never bothered to dig down and check. You just assumed the ground beneath you was solid, because it had held you up for so long. The morning everything changed started like any other morning in our home on Maple Street. I woke up at 6:30, exactly as I had for the past 42 years of marriage. Bob was already in the shower. He'd always been an early riser, especially since he made senior partner at the accounting firm 5 years ago. I could hear the water running through the pipes, that familiar sound that had marked the beginning of thousands of mornings just like this one. I pulled on my robe, the soft pink terry cloth one Grace had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, and made my way downstairs. My left leg was still a little weak from the stroke I'd had 6 months earlier, just a minor one, the doctors said, but it had scared us both terribly. Bob had been so attentive during my recovery, so caring, so present in a way he hadn't been in years. That should have been my first clue, shouldn't it? When someone who's been distant suddenly becomes devoted, you should ask yourself why. But I didn't. I just felt grateful. I felt like maybe we were finding our way back to each other after all those years of him working late and me feeling invisible. I started the coffee, measuring out the grounds exactly the way Bob liked it, strong enough to wake the dead, he always said. While it brewed, I pulled out the ingredients for his breakfast: 2 eggs, scrambled soft, 2 pieces of wheat toast, lightly buttered, half a grapefruit, sectioned, orange juice, no pulp. I'd made this exact breakfast so many times I could do it in my sleep. The sun was just starting to come through the kitchen window, hitting the little herb garden I kept on the windowsill. Basil, rosemary, thyme. I touched the basil leaves gently, and the scent rose up, fresh and green. This kitchen had been my domain for 4 decades. I'd chosen every dish in those cabinets, every pot hanging from the rack above the island. I'd painted these walls myself, that soft yellow that made everything feel warm and welcoming. This was my home, my life, my world. Smells good, Bob said, coming into the kitchen. He was already dressed for work, gray suit, blue tie, that cologne I'd given him for his birthday. He was still handsome at 68, my Bob. Silver hair that he wore just a touch longer than when we first met, laugh lines around his eyes, a slight paunch that he joked about but never seemed to worry about enough to actually do anything. "Coffee's ready," I said, pouring him a cup. "Breakfast will be done in just a minute." He kissed my cheek, a quick, distracted kiss, and sat down at the table, already scrolling through his phone. That phone. It had become like an extension of his hand in the past year. Always checking it, always typing, always somewhere else even when he was sitting right there in front of me. "Big day?" I asked, sliding his plate in front of him.
Oh yeah.
Big client meeting. Might run late." He didn't look up from the screen. "You've been running late a lot lately," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Casual. Never accusatory. That wasn't who I was. It's tax season, Maggie. You know how it is. I did know. Or I thought I did. Tax season had meant late nights for as long as I could remember. It was just part of being married to an accountant, especially one as successful as Bob. I'd learned long ago not to complain about it. Good wives supported their husbands' careers. Good wives understood. I'd spent 42 years being a good wife. "I was thinking," Bob said, finally looking up from his phone, "we should have that party soon. The one we've been talking about? The party." I set down my own coffee cup, feeling a little flutter of pleasure in my chest. We hadn't entertained in so long, not since before my stroke. I'd been wanting to have people over, to feel like part of the world again, instead of just trapped in this house with my recovery exercises and my daytime television. "Yeah. You know, a celebration. For your recovery," To show everyone you're doing better." He smiled at me, that warm smile that had made me fall in love with him at 25. "You are doing better, aren't you?" "Oh yes," I said quickly. "So much better. Dr. Morrison says I'm making excellent progress. My blood pressure is good, and I've been doing all my physical therapy exercises." "That's my girl." He reached over and patted my hand. "So let's celebrate. Let's show everyone that Maggie Thompson is back on her feet. We'll have it here at the house. I'll help with everything. We can invite the neighbors, some people from my work, your book club friends. Make it a real party." I felt tears prick at my eyes. This was so thoughtful of him, so kind. "See," I told myself, "see how much he cares about you. All those doubts you've been having, all those moments when you felt lonely even though you weren't alone, they were just in your head. Just your anxiety from the stroke. Just you being silly." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "When were you thinking?" "How about 3 weeks from Saturday? That gives us time to plan, send invitations, all that?" "3 weeks?" I repeated. "That's perfect. I can make my special roast, and the peach cobbler everyone loves and—" "Actually," Bob interrupted, "why don't we cater it? You shouldn't have to do all that work. You're still recovering." I felt a small stab of disappointment. I loved cooking for people. It was one of the things that made me feel useful, needed. But he was right, wasn't he? I was still recovering. I shouldn't overdo it. "If you think that's best," I said. "I do. I'll handle all the arrangements. You just rest and get yourself ready to be celebrated." He stood up, leaving half his breakfast uneaten on the plate. "I've got to run. Don't wait up tonight. This meeting might go really late." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the morning sun and the half-eaten breakfast, and that little voice in my head that I kept trying to silence. The voice that said something isn't right. But I was Maggie Thompson. I was a good wife, and good wives trusted their husbands. So I cleared away the breakfast dishes, I wiped down the counters, and I told that little voice to be quiet. I had a party to plan, after all. A celebration of my recovery. A celebration of us. I had no idea I was planning my own farewell party. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of blur. Bob was true to his word. He handled all the party arrangements himself. He ordered the catering, he made the guest list, he even hired someone to come clean the house top to bottom the day before. All I had to do, he kept saying, was rest and look beautiful. It should have made me happy. It should have made me feel cherished and cared for. Instead, it made me feel like a decoration in my own home, like a piece of furniture being polished up for display. But I didn't say anything. Good wives don't complain when their husbands are being thoughtful. Good wives are grateful. On Tuesday afternoon, exactly 12 days before the party, I was in the living room dusting the bookshelf when I heard Bob's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. He'd left it there when he went upstairs to change out of his work clothes. It kept buzzing and buzzing, that insistent sound that meant someone was calling, not just texting. I tried to ignore it, I really did. But it kept going and I thought, what if it's important? What if it's a client emergency? What if he needs to know? I walked into the kitchen and picked up the phone. The screen showed an incoming call from LH, no name, just initials. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail, and then I set it back down on the counter. But my hand was shaking. LH. Those initials meant nothing to me. But something about the way my heart was pounding told me they should. Something about the persistence of that call, the way it had rung and rung as if the person on the other end knew Bob would answer, expected him to answer, set off alarm bells in my head. "Was that my phone?" Bob asked, coming back into the kitchen. He'd changed into jeans and a polo shirt, casual clothes that made him look younger somehow. "Yes, someone called." I tried to sound casual, unconcerned. "Just a wife passing along a message." Something flickered across his face. Just for a second. Surprise, guilt. It was gone so fast I couldn't be sure I'd seen it at all. "Oh, that's just Linda. From work. Probably about the Morrison account." He picked up the phone and slipped it into his pocket without checking it. "Nothing important. Linda. From work. Nothing important." So why did my stomach feel like I'd swallowed a stone? "I didn't know you were working with someone named Linda," I said, keeping my voice light. "She's new." "Well, relatively new. Been with the firm about a year and a half. Sharp as a tack, really good with the complicated returns." He opened the refrigerator, pulled out a beer. "Want anything?" "No, thank you." I watched him pop the top off the beer, watched him take a long drink. "Will she be coming to the party, Linda?" "Oh, probably. I invited most of the office." He walked past me toward the living room. "I'm going to watch the game. That okay? Of course, I said. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after he left, staring at nothing, that stone in my stomach getting heavier and heavier. Linda. From work. Nothing important. Then why couldn't I stop thinking about her? The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 42 years of marriage. I went through Bob's pockets while he was in the shower. My hands were shaking as I reached into the jacket he'd left hanging on the back of the bedroom chair. I felt like a criminal, like I was violating some sacred trust. But that little voice in my head, the one I'd been trying to silence for months, was screaming now, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. His wallet, his keys, a receipt from Romano's, that expensive Italian restaurant downtown. The date on it was from last Tuesday, the night he said he'd worked late. Dinner for two. 2 entries, a bottle of wine, tiramisu, $147. I'd never been to Romano's. Bob had never taken me there. I put the receipt back carefully, exactly where I'd found it, and sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. There had to be an explanation. A client dinner. That's all it was. He'd taken a client to dinner and forgotten to mention it. That was reasonable. That was normal. But then why hadn't he expensed it? Bob was meticulous about his business expenses. He expensed everything. The shower shut off. I quickly moved away from the chair, busied myself making the bed. Tried to make my face look normal. Whatever normal looked like, I wasn't sure I remembered anymore. You okay? Bob asked, coming out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist. You look pale. I'm fine. Just a little tired. You should rest more. We don't want you overdoing it before the party. He came over and kissed my forehead. Only 10 days left. I want you looking your best. Looking my best. For my celebration party. For my recovery. Only it didn't feel like it was for me at all anymore. It felt like I was being prepared for something else entirely. Like a pig being fattened for slaughter. I pushed the thought away. That was ridiculous. Dramatic. I was being paranoid because of the stroke, because of the stress, because I'd spent too much time alone in this house with my own thoughts. But that night, when Bob said he had to work late again, I found myself standing at the window watching his car pull out of the driveway, and I wondered where he was really going. It was my neighbor Mr. Chen who first planted the seed that would eventually grow into the truth. Mr. Chen had lived next door for 15 years. He was 72, a retired engineer, a widower who spent his days tending his roses and walking his ancient beagle Chester. He was kind and observant in that way that elderly people often are, seeing things that others miss because they have the time to actually look. I was getting the mail on Thursday afternoon when he called out to me from his driveway. "Mrs. Thompson, how are you feeling?" "Much better, Mr. Chen. Thank you for asking." I walked over to the fence that separated our properties. Chester waddled over to sniff my hand, and I bent down to pet his soft ears. "I'm glad to hear it. You gave us all quite a scare." He paused, pruning shears in hand, looking at me with those sharp eyes. "I see Bob has been keeping very busy lately." Something in his tone made me look up. "Yes, he's been working quite a bit. Tax season."
Ah, yes.
"Tax season," Mr. Chen nodded slowly, although I must say he keeps rather unusual hours for tax season. Sometimes I see him leaving at 10, 11 at night, coming home very late. Last Tuesday, I was up with Chester. He'd gotten into something that upset his stomach, and I saw Bob's car pull in at nearly 2 in the morning. My mouth went dry. 2? Yes, I remember, because I thought it was so late even for busy season. He clipped a dead rose bloom, not looking at me. And just last week, on Saturday afternoon, I saw him leaving with a woman. Not you. Of course, younger. They were laughing. The world tilted slightly. A woman. I assumed it was someone from his office. A colleague, perhaps, working on the weekend. Chen finally looked at me directly. "I hope I haven't spoken out of turn, Mrs. Thompson, but you've been kind to me since my Martha passed, and I thought, well, I thought you should know what I've observed." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there holding the mail in my trembling hands while Chester licked my fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Chen," I finally managed. "I thank you." I walked back to my house in a daze. 2 in the morning, a woman in his car on a Saturday, Romano's restaurant, LH calling his phone, Linda. From work. Nothing important. I went upstairs to our bedroom. The bedroom Bob and I had shared for 42 years. And I did something else I'd never done before. I went through his dresser drawers. Nothing in the top drawer. Socks and underwear, all neatly folded the way I'd been folding them for decades. Nothing in the second drawer. T-shirts and workout clothes he never actually worked out in. The third drawer. His casual shirts, the ones he wore on weekends, and there tucked under a stack of polo shirts I found it. A credit card I'd never seen before, not one of our joint cards. A separate account in his name only. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it, but I took it downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table, and I called the customer service number on the back. "I need to verify some charges," I said when the representative answered. "This is my husband's card, and I want to make sure there's no fraud." It wasn't fraud. It was so much worse than fraud. 6 months of charges. Hotels, jewelry stores, flower shops, all in our city, all on days and nights when Bob said he was working late. The representative read them off in a pleasant, professional voice while my entire world crumbled around me. The Riverside Hotel, $430. The Riverside Hotel again, $395. Tiffany & Co., $2,600. Romano's Restaurant, $147. La Belle Fleur, $89. Are you still there? Would you like me to dispute any of these charges? No, I whispered. They're not fraud. I hung up and sat there in my kitchen, my sunny yellow kitchen where I'd made 42 years of breakfasts. And I finally admitted what I'd known deep down for months. My husband was having an affair. And the celebration party he was planning. I had a terrible feeling it wasn't a celebration of my recovery at all. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Bob. Next to this man I'd shared a life with for over 4 decades, and I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. Every time he shifted in his sleep, every time he breathed, I felt my body tense up like I was waiting for something terrible to happen, which I suppose I was. When morning came, Bob got up like it was any other day. Shower, coffee, breakfast I could barely force myself to make. And all I could think was, how do you do this? How do you kiss me goodbye and walk out that door when you've been lying to me for months? When you've been with someone else? But I didn't say anything. I just handed him his travel mug and watched him leave. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I called Grace. My daughter and I hadn't been close in recent years. That was my fault, I suppose. After she divorced Marcus 3 years ago, I'd said some things I shouldn't have. Things about trying harder, about marriage being work, about not giving up so easily. I'd been thinking about my own marriage, about how I'd stuck it out through the hard times, through the lonely times. I didn't know then that my marriage was built on lies. I thought I was giving her wisdom. Instead, I'd driven her away. "Mom," Grace answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "We hadn't spoken in almost 2 months. Is everything okay? Are you feeling all right?" And just like that, hearing my daughter's voice, all the strength I'd been holding onto for the past 24 hours crumbled. I started crying. "Mom, Mom, what's wrong? Talk to me. I need you." I managed to get out between sobs. "Grace, I need you to come home. Please? I'm on my way. 20 minutes, Mom. Stay on the phone with me, okay?" She stayed on the line the whole drive from her apartment across town. She talked to me, kept me breathing, kept me from falling completely apart. And when she walked through my front door and wrapped her arms around me, I realized how much I'd missed her, how much I'd needed her all this time. We sat at the kitchen table, that table where I'd served thousands of meals, where we'd done homework and paid bills and planned vacations, and I told her everything. The phone calls, the receipt, Mr. Chen's observations, the credit card. Grace's face went from concern to shock to absolutely furious. "That son of a—" She caught herself, took a deep breath. "I'm going to kill him." "Grace." "No, Mom. Do you know what he was telling me? For the past 6 months, every time I called to check on you after your stroke, he'd say you were doing fine but you needed rest. He'd say you were fragile, that I shouldn't upset you. He kept me away from you." Her eyes filled with tears. "He kept me away from my own mother so he could do this. I hadn't thought about that. But she was right. Bob had been the gatekeeper of my recovery, the one who decided who could visit and when. And Grace, who I'd had that argument with, who I'd pushed away, he'd made sure she stayed away." "What's this party really about?" Grace asked, her voice hard. "Because it's not about celebrating your recovery, is it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think he's planning something. Something that involves me and this Linda woman and all our friends and neighbors. Then we need to find out what." Grace pulled out her phone. "What's Dad's firm called again?" "Thompson and Associates." "But Grace, what are you—" She was already searching. A few taps on her phone, and she pulled up the company website. She scrolled through the staff photos until she stopped on one. "Is this her?" I looked at the screen. Linda Hartwell, senior accountant. She was younger than me, maybe 52 or 53, blonde hair and a sleek bob, perfect makeup, designer suit. She was smiling at the camera with confidence, with power. She looked like the kind of woman who knew what she wanted and took it. I've never seen her before, I said. Well, let's fix that. Grace stood up. Get dressed, Mom. We're going to Dad's office. What? No, I can't. Yes, you can. You're going to walk in there, you're going to see your husband. And you're going to watch how he reacts when you show up unannounced. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll run into Linda. Grace's jaw was set in that stubborn way she'd had since she was a little girl. She looked like me, everyone always said. Same dark eyes, same determined chin. You deserve to know the truth, Mom, and you deserve to look them both in the face. She was right. I'd spent enough time hiding in this house, pretending everything was fine. It was time to stop being the good wife and start being the woman who demanded answers. I got dressed. I put on my best dress. The navy blue one Bob always said brought out my eyes. I did my makeup carefully, covering the exhaustion and the tears. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. But I went anyway. Thompson and Associates occupied the 5th floor of the Riverside building downtown. I'd been there exactly 3 times in the past 20 years. Bob didn't like me dropping by the office. He said it was unprofessional, that it made him look like he couldn't manage his personal life. Now I understood why he really didn't want me there. Grace held my arm as we walked through the glass doors into the reception area. The young woman at the desk looked up with a professional smile. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? I'm here to see my husband, I said, and my voice only shook a little. Bob Thompson. Oh, Mrs. Thompson! The receptionist's smile became more genuine. What a nice surprise. Let me just call back and… That's not necessary, Grace interrupted smoothly. We know the way. Thank you. We walked past the desk before the girl could protest, down the hallway lined with office doors. Bob's office was at the end, the corner office with the view, the one he'd worked 30 years to earn. The door was closed. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures inside. Grace squeezed my hand. You ready? I nodded. I wasn't ready. I'd never be ready. But I opened the door anyway. Bob was sitting on the edge of his desk, laughing at something, and sitting in the chair across from him, legs crossed elegantly, was Linda Hartwell. She was even more beautiful in person than in her photo, and the way she was looking at my husband, with familiarity, with intimacy, with possession, told me everything I needed to know. They both turned when the door opened. Bob's face went white. Maggie! What are you, Grace? What are you both doing here? Surprise Dad? Grace said coldly. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at Linda, who was now standing up, smoothing her skirt, giving me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You must be Margaret, she said, extending her hand. I've heard so much about you. I'm Linda Hartwell. I looked at her hand like it was a snake. I didn't take it. I said flatly, nothing important. Bob's face went from white to red. Maggie, this isn't. We were just discussing the Morrison account. The Morrison account, I repeated. Is that what they're calling it now? Linda's smile faded. She looked at Bob, and something passed between them. Some silent communication that made my stomach turn. Perhaps I should give you some privacy, Linda said, gathering her papers. As she walked past me toward the door, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear her whisper, "The party's going to be wonderful. Bob's worked so hard on it." And then she was gone, leaving me standing there with my husband and my daughter in an office that suddenly felt like enemy territory. How could you? I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow. Broken. How could you do this to me? Maggie, don't understand. Then explain it to me. The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. Explain the secret credit card. Explain the hotels and the restaurants and the jewelry. Explain why you've been lying to me for months. Bob's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in 42 years, my husband, who always had an answer for everything, had nothing to say. That's what I thought, I said. I turned and walked out of that office with my head held high, even though everything inside me was screaming. Grace followed close behind, her hand on my back, holding me together. We were halfway to the elevator when I heard Bob calling after us. Maggie, wait! We need to talk about this! I stopped, turned around, looked at this man I'd loved for most of my life. The party, I said. What's the party really for, Bob? He froze. Guilt was written all over his face. It's for your recovery. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. What's the party for? He couldn't hold my gaze. He looked down at his expensive shoes, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. To introduce Linda to our friends, to ease the transition. As if our marriage ending was just a business deal. As if 42 years together was just a phase we were transitioning out of. Mom, Grace said urgently, let's go. But I couldn't move. I stood there staring at Bob, and I realized something. I'd spent 42 years making this man comfortable, making his life easy, being whatever he needed me to be, and he was throwing me away like I was nothing. I'll be at the party, I heard myself say. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Grace drove me home in silence. I sat in the passenger seat watching the familiar streets pass by. The same streets I'd driven down for decades, taking Grace to school, going to the grocery store, living my small, predictable life. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. When we got back to the house, Grace made me tea, even though I didn't want it. She sat me down at the kitchen table and looked at me with such fierce determination that I almost smiled despite everything. Okay, she said. We have 8 days until this party. 8 days to figure out what you're going to do. What I'm going to do. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Grace, I don't even know where to start. Well, first things first. We need to protect you financially. Do you know what assets you and Dad have? I blinked at her. Assets? The house, savings accounts, retirement funds, investments. Mom, if Dad's planning to leave you, we need to make sure he doesn't clean you out first. Grace pulled out her phone and started making notes. Do you have access to all the bank accounts? Yes. We have a joint checking and savings. But Bob handles all the investments and retirement planning. Of course he does, Grace muttered. Okay, first thing tomorrow we're going to the bank. We're going to get statements for everything. Then we're calling a lawyer. A lawyer. The word felt foreign in my mouth. People like me didn't need lawyers. We were good wives. We worked things out. Except there was nothing to work out. Bob had already made his choice. Mom. Grace reached across the table and took my hand. Listen to me. I know this is scary. I know you never thought you'd be in this position. But you need to protect yourself. Dad is clearly planning something, and you need to be ready. She was right. I knew she was right. But the thought of actually taking action, of treating my marriage like a business deal that needed to be dissolved, made me feel sick. What about the party? I asked. Do I cancel it? Do I confront him in front of everyone? Do I just not show up? Grace was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then a slow smile spread across her face. No, you show up. You be there. But on your terms? Not his. What do you mean? I mean, if Dad wants to use this party to introduce his mistress to your friends and community, let him try. But let's make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man he is. Grace leaned forward, her eyes bright. Mom, you've been silent for 42 years. You've been the perfect wife, the one who never complained, never made a scene. But it's time for people to hear your voice. I thought about that. About all the times I'd bitten my tongue, all the times I'd smoothed things over, all the times I'd made excuses for Bob's absences, his distance, his lack of attention. I'd protected his reputation at the cost of my own dignity. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe it was time people knew the truth. But how? I asked. How do I do that without looking like the bitter, crazy wife? You don't have to do anything dramatic. You just have to tell the truth. Grace squeezed my hand. And you're not going to be alone. I'll be there. And we're going to get help. Help. Remember Aunt Sharon? Dad's sister. I nodded. Sharon Thompson. Wells had been one of my closest friends before she and Bob had a falling out 5 years ago over some business deal gone wrong. Bob had forbidden me from seeing her, and like the good wife I was, I'd obeyed. I'm going to call her, Grace said. She deserves to know what her brother is doing, and I have a feeling she'll want to help. The next morning, Grace and I went to First National Bank, where Bob and I had kept our accounts for 30 years. I felt like a criminal as I sat across from the bank manager, Mr. Patterson, and asked to see all our account statements. Of course, Mrs. Thompson, he said pleasantly. Is there a problem? Just want to review our finances, I said, trying to sound casual, making sure everything is in order. He printed out everything, checking savings, money market accounts, and as I looked at the numbers I felt my blood run cold. Where's the money? I whispered. Grace looked over my shoulder. The savings account that had once held over $200,000, money we'd saved for retirement, for emergencies, for our future, now had less than $30,000. Mom, when was the last time you looked at these accounts? I don't know. A year? Maybe longer? Bob always handled it. He said I didn't need to worry about it. Grace's jaw clenched. He's been taking the money. Probably transferring it somewhere you can't access it, getting ready to hide assets before the divorce. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Thompson, I probably shouldn't say this, but Mr. Thompson has been in here several times in the past few months. He moved a substantial amount into a separate account. Just his name on it. Can I see that account? I asked, even though I knew the answer. I'm sorry, but since you're not listed on that account, I can't share that information with you. So Bob had taken our life savings, money I'd contributed to with my teacher's salary for 35 years, and hidden it where I couldn't touch it, all while planning this party to introduce his mistress to our friends. What else can you tell me? I asked Mr. Patterson. Please. I need to know what my husband has been doing. He looked uncomfortable, but something in my face must have moved him. He took out a new credit card, the one you asked about on the phone the other day, and he's been making regular transfers to an account at Riverside Bank. I don't have access to that account, but the transfers have been consistent. $2,000 a month for the past 6 months, $2,000 a month. To Linda probably, helping her with her bills, taking care of her while I sat at home in my yellow kitchen making his breakfast. Thank you, Mr. Patterson, I said quietly. You've been very helpful. Grace and I left the bank and sat in her car in the parking lot. I felt numb, hollowed out. Mom, we need to freeze the accounts. Today. We need to make sure he can't take any more. How do I do that? We need a lawyer. Now. Grace pulled out her phone and started searching. I know someone from work. Her sister is a divorce attorney. One of the best in the state. Within an hour, we were sitting in the office of Patricia Blackwell, attorney at law. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no nonsense, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. Tell me everything, she said, pen poised over a legal pad. So I did. I told her about the affair, the hidden credit card, the drained savings account, the party. I told her things I'd never told anyone, about how lonely I'd been, how invisible I'd felt, how I'd convinced myself it was normal because that's what marriage was. Ms. Blackwell listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, she looked up at me with something like respect in her eyes. Mrs. Thompson, you have grounds for divorce based on adultery. More importantly, you have evidence of financial misconduct. Your husband has been systematically hiding marital assets in preparation for divorce. That's not going to look good for him in court. What can I do? First, we file an emergency motion to freeze all marital assets. He won't be able to touch another penny without court approval. Second, we document everything, and I mean everything. Every text, every call, every credit card charge. We build a case that shows a pattern of deception and financial abuse. She leaned forward. Third, you start thinking about what you want from this divorce. The house. Alimony. A fair split of all assets including the money he's hidden. Because I promise you, Mrs. Thompson, we're going to get you everything you deserve. For the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. And underneath that hope, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt angry, not the quiet swallowed-down frustration I'd lived with for so long, real anger, the kind that burned hot and bright and demanded justice. I want the house, I said firmly. It's my home. I chose every curtain, painted every wall, planted every flower in the garden. He can have Linda, but he can't have my home. Ms. Blackwell smiled. Then let's make sure you keep it. I'll file the emergency motion today. Do you want me to serve him with divorce papers before or after this party of his? I thought about it. Thought about Bob's plan to parade Linda in front of all our friends and neighbors, to ease the transition, to make me look like the fragile, sick wife who needed to be replaced. After? I said. Let him have his party. Let him think everything is going according to plan. And then we'll show him exactly what it means to underestimate Margaret Thompson. That evening, Aunt Sharon called. Grace had filled her in on everything, and I could hear the fury in her voice the moment I answered. Maggie, honey, I am so sorry. I should have stayed in touch. I should have checked on you. You tried, I reminded her. Bob wouldn't let me see you. That controlling bastard. Sharon took a breath. Grace tells me he's planning some kind of party to introduce his little mistress. Is that true? It's true. Hajj, I'm going. Good. Because I'm coming too, and I'm bringing some friends. There was something gleeful in her voice now. Maggie, do you remember Bob's business partner, Tom Henderson? The one who was involved in that deal that went south between Bob and me. Vaguely. Well, Tom and I stayed friends. And Tom knows some very interesting things about Bob's business practices. Things that might be relevant to your divorce. Things that might interest the IRS. She paused. I'm not saying Bob's been cooking the books, but let's just say his client acquisition strategies are creative? I felt a small smile tugging at my lips. Sharon, are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that the truth has a way of coming out, especially at parties where people have had a few drinks and feel like talking. She laughed. This party is going to be very interesting, Maggie. Very interesting indeed. After I hung up with Sharon, Grace came into the living room where I was sitting. She had her laptop open. Mom, I've been doing some research on Linda Hartwell. And she's not quite the perfect professional Dad thinks she is. She was fired from her last job for inappropriate workplace relationships with her married boss. Grace turned the laptop so I could see. It's all there in the public records. He divorced his wife, married Linda, and then she left him 18 months later. Took half of everything. So this was Linda's pattern. She targeted successful, married men. She broke up their marriages. She took what she could and moved on. And Bob thought he was special. He thought he was different. He thought she actually loved him. Part of me, the part that had loved Bob for 42 years, almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the way Linda had whispered to me in Bob's office. The party's going to be wonderful. Bob's worked so hard on it. She knew exactly what she was doing. They both did. Good, I said to Grace. Make copies of everything. We'll give it to Miss Blackwell, and we'll make sure a few copies accidentally get left lying around at the party. Grace grinned. Mom, I'm so proud of you right now. I looked at my daughter, my fierce, brilliant daughter who I'd pushed away with my outdated ideas about marriage and commitment. She'd been through a divorce herself. She'd survived it and come out stronger. She'd tried to warn me, in her way, that not all marriages were worth saving. I should have listened to her then. But I was listening now. Grace, I said, I'm sorry for what I said about your divorce, for taking your father's side, for making you feel like you'd failed. She came and sat next to me on the couch, taking my hand. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You were brave. You knew when to walk away from something that wasn't serving you anymore. I was too scared to see that marriages can be wrong. That leaving doesn't mean you failed. It means you valued yourself enough to choose better. I squeezed her hand. You tried to tell me, and I didn't listen. I'm listening now. We sat there together, mother and daughter, planning our battle strategy, and for the first time since I'd found that credit card, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a warrior preparing for war. Bob wanted a party. He'd get a party. Just not the one he was expecting. The week before the party was the strangest week of my life. Bob and I existed in the same house like two ghosts haunting different dimensions. He'd come home from work, ask how I was feeling, remind me to rest for the party. I'd smile and nod and say all the right things. And the whole time I was documenting everything. Every late night. Every unexplained absence. Every time his phone buzzed and he left the room to answer it. Grace had set up a shared folder on my phone where I took screenshots, made notes, recorded dates and times. Building our case, piece by piece. Ms. Blackwell had filed the emergency motion to freeze our assets. Bob didn't know yet. He wouldn't find out until after the party when the divorce papers were served. But it meant that every dollar in our accounts was now protected. He couldn't move another cent without the court's permission. It gave me a fierce satisfaction, knowing that while he thought he was in control, I was 3 steps ahead. On Wednesday, 3 days before the party, Bob came home with garment bags. I got you something, he said, hanging them on the back of the bedroom door. For the party, I want you to look beautiful. I unzipped the first bag. Inside was a dress I would never have chosen for myself. Cream-colored, elegant, expensive, conservative. It looked like something you'd wear to a funeral, not a celebration. Or like something you'd wear to be replaced. It's lovely. I lied. I thought so too. Linda helped me pick it out. She has great taste. Linda helped him pick out my dress. The dress I was supposed to wear to the party, where he planned to introduce her as his future wife. The audacity of it took my breath away. How thoughtful of her, I said, my voice perfectly even. Bob smiled, oblivious to the rage burning behind my eyes. She's really looking forward to meeting everyone. She's been nervous about it, actually. Wants to make a good impression. I bet she does, I thought. I'm sure everyone will find her fascinating. That night, after Bob fell asleep, I got up and went down to the kitchen. Grace had given me a key to her apartment and told me to pack a bag. Just in case. Just in case Bob figured out what I was planning. Just in case things went badly at the party. Just in case I needed to leave quickly. I stood in my kitchen in the dark, looking at all the familiar shapes, the herb garden on the windowsill, the mixer I'd had since we were first married, the coffee maker I'd used to make Bob's coffee every single morning for 42 years. This was my home, my space, my life, and I'd be damned if I was going to let him take it from me. Thursday morning, Mr. Chen knocked on my door. I answered it to find him standing there with Chester at his feet and a manila envelope in his hands. Mrs. Thompson. I hope I'm not intruding. Of course not, Mr. Chen. Please come in. He stepped inside but didn't sit down. He held out the envelope to me. After our conversation the other day, I took the liberty of writing down everything I've observed over the past 6 months. Dates, times, descriptions of the woman I saw with your husband. He paused, looking uncomfortable. I also took some photographs. Just from my window, you understand. I'm an old man who doesn't sleep well and I notice things. I took the envelope with shaking hands. Mr. Chen, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. My Martha, God rest her soul, she always said that good people deserve to be protected from bad behavior. You've been a good neighbor to me, Mrs. Thompson. You brought me meals after Martha passed. You checked on me during the snowstorm last winter. You treated an old man with kindness when you didn't have to. His eyes were fierce behind his glasses. So now I'm returning the favor. Whatever you're planning to do, this might help. I looked inside the envelope. Pages of meticulous notes. Photographs of Bob's car leaving at odd hours, returning late at night. A photograph of Bob and Linda getting out of his car together on a Saturday afternoon, laughing. Evidence. Undeniable, time-stamped evidence. Thank you, I whispered. You have no idea how much this means to me. Oh, I think I do. He patted my hand. I'll be at your party on Saturday, Mrs. Thompson. I wouldn't miss it. After he left, I called Ms. Blackwell and told her about Mr. Chen's evidence. She sounded delighted. This is perfect, Maggie. With this and the financial records, we have an airtight case. Your husband won't know what hit him. Friday afternoon, the day before the party, Grace and Sharon came over to help me prepare. Not to prepare for Bob's version of the party, to prepare for mine. Sharon had changed little in the 5 years since I'd seen her. She was still tall and elegant, with silver hair she wore in a stylish bob, and eyes that missed nothing. She hugged me tightly when she arrived. Maggie, sweetheart, you look exhausted. I haven't been sleeping well. I imagine not. She set down her purse and looked around the house. God, I've missed this place. Bob always did have terrible taste in grudges. That business deal was his mistake, not mine, but of course he couldn't admit that. What happened? I asked. I'd never known the full story. He wanted me to invest in a commercial property deal with one of his clients. I did my due diligence and found out the client was being investigated for fraud. I pulled out, the deal collapsed, and Bob blamed me for ruining his reputation. Sharon shook her head. In reality, I saved him from going down with that client. The man was indicted 6 months later, but Bob couldn't see it that way. His ego wouldn't let him. Grace was setting up her laptop at the kitchen table. Okay, here's what we have so far. All of Dad's financial records showing the transfers and hidden accounts, Mr. Chen's documentation and photos, the information about Linda's history, and Mom's testimony about the affairs, the lies, all of it. Good. Sharon leaned over to look at the screen. And I have something to add. Tom Henderson is coming to the party tomorrow. He's bringing copies of some very interesting emails between Bob and a client. Emails that suggest Bob was aware that the client was underreporting income. Tom kept them all these years just in case. He's been waiting for the right moment to use them. I looked at Sharon in surprise. That sounds like evidence of tax fraud. Sharon smiled grimly. It's not quite that dramatic. More like willful ignorance of a client's illegal activities. But it's enough to damage Bob's reputation significantly. Especially if certain regulatory boards were to receive anonymous tips. Sharon, I don't want to ruin his career. Sharon's expression softened. Maggie, he was planning to ruin your life. To throw you away after 42 years of service like you were nothing. To drain your savings and leave you with nothing while he started over with some woman who makes a habit of destroying marriages. She took my hands. You don't have to destroy him, but you do need to protect yourself. And sometimes protecting yourself means making sure the other person can't hurt you anymore. She was right. I'd spent so long trying to be the good wife, the kind wife, the forgiving wife. But forgiveness without consequences wasn't forgiveness, it was permission to keep hurting me. Okay, I said. What's the plan for tomorrow? Grace pulled up a timeline on her laptop. The party starts at 6. Guests will arrive, there will be drinks and appetizers. Dad will probably wait until around 7 to make his announcement. Whatever that announcement is. He'll introduce Linda, I said with certainty. He'll say something about how we've grown apart, how I need someone to take care of me now that I'm not well, how Linda has graciously offered to help ease the transition. Grace's face hardened. That's sick. That's Bob. Sharon pulled out her phone. Okay, so we let him make his little speech, let Linda stand there basking in what she thinks is her victory, and then I speak, I said quietly. I tell the truth. All of it. In front of everyone. And I'll back you up, Sharon said. I'll talk about the business issues, the financial impropriety, and I'll talk about how Dad manipulated me into staying away from Mom during her recovery. Grace added, how he isolated her so he could control the narrative. I looked at these two women, my daughter and my sister-in-law, who were willing to stand with me, to fight for me, to help me reclaim my life. I thought about Mr. Chen, carefully documenting evidence from his window. I thought about Ms. Blackwell, preparing the legal papers that would protect me. I thought about all the years I'd spent alone, thinking I had to handle everything by myself, thinking that asking for help was a sign of weakness. I'd been so wrong. There's one more thing, I said. The dress Bob bought me, the one Linda picked out. What about it? Grace asked. I'm not wearing it. I stood up and walked to the stairs. Come on, we're going shopping. I want to choose my own dress for my own party. We went to Maribel's, the boutique downtown where I'd never shopped, because Bob always said it was too expensive, too flashy, too much. The owner, Denise, was an old friend from my teaching days. When I told her what I needed, dress that said I'm done being invisible, her eyes lit up. Honey, I have just the thing. She brought out a dress in deep emerald green. It was elegant but bold, with 3/4 sleeves and a neckline that was tasteful but not matronly. It fit me perfectly, highlighting the figure I'd let myself forget I had. It's beautiful, Grace breathed. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the good wife who'd made breakfast that morning. She wasn't the victim who'd cried herself to sleep. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who was done being walked on. I'll take it, I said. Denise smiled. You're going to knock them dead, Maggie. That's the idea, Sharon murmured. That evening, Grace helped me prepare my speech. We sat at the kitchen table with note cards, writing and rewriting until the words were perfect. Not angry. I didn't want to seem bitter or vengeful. Just true, just honest. Just the facts of what Bob had done and what I was going to do about it. Remember, Grace said, you don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't have to justify yourself. You're not the one who did anything wrong. I know. I looked at the cards in my hand. 42 years reduced to a few paragraphs. It's just hard to let go of everything I thought my life was. You're not letting go of your life, Mom. You're reclaiming it. Grace squeezed my shoulder. Tomorrow, you take back your power. You show everyone, including yourself, who Margaret Thompson really is. That night, Bob came home late again. I heard him come in around 11, heard him moving around downstairs, heard him finally come up to bed. He smelled like perfume. Not mine. Big day tomorrow, he said, climbing into bed beside me. Yes, I agreed. Big day? You nervous? More than you know, I thought. A little. Don't be. It's going to be perfect. You'll see. He rolled over, his back to me. Within minutes, he was snoring softly. I lay awake in the dark, my heart pounding. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would stop being the woman who accepted whatever Bob decided to give her. Tomorrow, I would become the woman who demanded what she deserved. Tomorrow, Bob Thompson was going to learn that underestimating his wife was the biggest mistake of his life. I smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. I woke up on Saturday morning with a strange sense of calm. After all the fear, all the tears, all the sleepless nights, I felt ready. Today was the day I stopped being a victim and became something else entirely. Bob was already up, pacing around the house, checking details. The caterers would arrive at 4, the bartender at 4:30, guests at 6. He was in his element, organizing and controlling everything, just like he'd been organizing and controlling our marriage for 4 decades. How are you feeling? He asked when I came downstairs. Ready for your big day. More ready than you know, I said and smiled. He mistook my smile for nervousness. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. Better than fine. It's going to be perfect. Perfect for him, maybe. Perfect for Linda. But the perfection he was imagining was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. I spent the morning with Grace, who'd arrived early to help me get ready. We stayed upstairs in my bedroom, away from Bob and the caterers setting up downstairs. "How are you doing, Mom?" she asked, helping me with my makeup. "I'm okay." Really, and I was. The fear had burned away, leaving only clarity. "Whatever happens today, I know I'm doing the right thing." "You are. And I'll be right there with you the whole time." At 5 o'clock, I put on the emerald dress. Grace zipped it up, and I turned to look at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone I barely recognized, strong, elegant, determined. Not invisible, not anymore. "You look beautiful, Mom," Grace said softly. "Like a queen." I thought about Bob and Linda downstairs, probably reviewing their strategy for the evening. I thought about all the guests who would arrive soon, expecting a celebration of my recovery. I thought about what they were actually going to get, the truth. "Let's go," I said. When I walked down the stairs, Bob was in the living room talking to one of the catering staff. He looked up, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Surprise, concern. Whatever it was gone quickly. "Maggie, you look— that's not the dress I bought you." "No," I said calmly. "It's not. I preferred this one. But Linda and I specifically chose—" "I'm aware. But it's my party, isn't it? My celebration?" I smiled at him. "So I chose my own dress." A muscle twitched in his jaw. He didn't like it when things didn't go according to his plan. "Well, you look nice, I suppose. Though the other dress would have been more appropriate. More appropriate for a funeral, maybe. For a woman being put out to pasture." The doorbell rang. The first guests were arriving. By 6:30 the house was full. Neighbors from up and down Maple Street, Bob's colleagues from the firm, my book club friends, people from church. They came with smiles and well wishes, congratulating me on my recovery, telling me how wonderful I looked. If only they knew what they were really here for. I saw Sharon arrive with a distinguished-looking man I assumed was Tom Henderson. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod. Mr. Chen was already here, standing quietly by the fireplace with Chester on a leash, watching everything with those sharp eyes. And then Linda arrived. She came in like she owned the place, wearing a red dress that was just a touch too tight, too bright. She went straight to Bob, kissed his cheek in a way that was too familiar, too intimate. Several people noticed. I saw the looks, the raised eyebrows, the whispered questions. Good, let them wonder. Bob clinked a glass at 7 o'clock, just as Grace had predicted. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice warm and welcoming. "As you know, we're here to celebrate Maggie's recovery from her health scare earlier this year. It's been a difficult time for both of us, and I'm so grateful to see her looking so well. So well. As if I'd been sick, as if I'd been the problem. But tonight isn't just about celebrating Maggie's health," Bob continued. "It's also about celebrating change. About embracing new chapters in our lives. About being honest with ourselves and with the people we care about." Here it comes, I thought. I felt Grace move closer to my side. "Maggie and I have been married for 42 years, Bob said, and his voice took on a tone of false sadness. 42 wonderful years. But the truth is we've both changed. We've grown in different directions. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is acknowledge that and move forward separately." Gasps around the room. People looking at me with pity, with shock. Mary from book club had her hand over her mouth. The Johnsons from next door looked horrified. "I know this is difficult to hear," Bob said. "But I want everyone to understand that this is a mutual decision. Maggie's health challenges have made us both realize that we need different things now. She needs someone who can be there for her full time, and I need—" He paused, looking at Linda with what I'm sure he thought was affection. "I need someone who understands my work, my lifestyle. Someone who can be the partner I need in this stage of my life." He gestured to Linda, who stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Many of you have met Linda Hartwell, my colleague at the firm. What you don't know is that she's become much more than a colleague over the past months. She's been a friend, a confidante, and now—" He took her hand. "Now she's going to be my partner as I move into this next chapter." The room was dead silent. People were staring at Bob, at Linda, at me, waiting to see what I would do, waiting to see if I'd cry, if I'd make a scene, if I'd collapse. Bob turned to me, his face arranged in an expression of concern. "Maggie, I hope you understand. I hope you can accept this change gracefully. After all, we both want what's best for each other, gracefully." He wanted me to accept my replacement gracefully. I felt Grace's hand squeeze mine. I saw Sharon moving closer, Tom Henderson beside her. I saw Mr. Chen pull a manila envelope from his jacket pocket. And I stepped forward. "You're right, Bob," I said, and my voice was calm and clear. "Tonight is about being honest, about telling the truth. So let me tell everyone here the real truth." Bob's face went pale. "Maggie, I didn't ask what you think." I turned to face the room full of people. "Bob is correct about one thing. We are getting divorced. But not because of my health. Not because we've grown in different directions. We're getting divorced because my husband has been having an affair with Linda Hartwell for at least 6 months, possibly longer." Linda's smile vanished. Bob started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I have proof," I continued. "Credit card statements showing hotel rooms and expensive dinners. Photographs of them together, taken by our observant neighbor Mr. Chen, text messages. Financial records showing that Bob has been systematically draining our joint accounts and hiding money in preparation for this divorce." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "I can show anyone who's interested. The Riverside Hotel, multiple visits. Romano's restaurant. Tiffany & Company, where Bob bought a very expensive necklace. I didn't receive it. But I imagine Linda did." Linda's hand flew to her neck, where a diamond pendant glittered. Several people in the room looked at it, then at each other. The whispers started. "Maggie, this is inappropriate." Bob tried again. "What's inappropriate?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "Is planning a party to introduce your mistress to our friends, while pretending it's about celebrating your sick wife's recovery. What's inappropriate is taking the retirement savings I contributed to for 35 years and hiding it where I can't access it. What's inappropriate is having your mistress help you choose the dress you wanted me to wear tonight. A dress that looked like something you'd wear to a funeral." Sharon stepped forward. "And what's inappropriate is using your position as a senior partner to manipulate a colleague into a relationship, which is what Bob did. Linda Hartwell has a history of affairs with married men. Her last relationship ended her previous employer's marriage before she moved on to her next target." Linda's face turned red.
That's a lie."
"Eyes it." Tom Henderson pulled out his own folder. "Because I have copies of the complaint filed against you at your previous firm. Sexual harassment, relationship misconduct, manipulation of a superior. You were terminated, not resigned. It's all here in the public record." The whispers became louder. People were backing away from Linda, looking at her with suspicion, with disgust. Bob was sweating now. "This is ridiculous. You're all making this into something it's not. Linda and I are in love. What Maggie and I had has been over for years." "Has it?" I looked at him directly. "Because every morning for the past 42 years, I made your coffee exactly how you like it. I made your breakfast. I ironed your shirts. I took care of this house, our home. I supported your career, your dreams, your ambitions. I put my own life on hold to make sure yours was comfortable." My voice cracked slightly. "And when I had a stroke, when I was scared and vulnerable, you used it as an opportunity to prepare for my replacement." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't wipe them away. "Let them see. Let everyone see what Bob had done. You told our daughter not to visit me," I continued. "You isolated me. You made me think I was fragile, that I needed to rest, that I shouldn't upset myself. All while you were spending our money on hotels and jewelry for another woman. All while you were planning this party, this goodbye party disguised as a celebration." Mary from book club was crying. The Johnsons looked furious. Pastor Williams, who'd married us 42 years ago, was shaking his head in disappointment. Bob's face had gone from pale to red. "You're making me out to be a monster. I was trying to do this kindly, trying to make the transition easy for everyone." "The transition?" Grace stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You mean the part where you tried to make my mother look like she was too sick to be your wife anymore? Where you told me she was too fragile for visitors, that I shouldn't stress her out, all while you were lying to her face every single day." Mr. Chen spoke up from his spot by the fireplace, his voice quiet but clear. "I have documented every time Mr. Thompson left this house late at night and returned in the early morning hours. Every time I saw him with Miss Hartwell. It's all written down, with dates and times, and I will testify to it in court if necessary." Bob looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. Faces that had once respected him, admired him, considered him a pillar of the community. Now they looked at him with contempt. "This is insane," he said, his voice desperate. "Maggie, please. Let's discuss this privately." "No." I stood straighter, feeling stronger with every word. I'm done with private discussions. I'm done with protecting your reputation at the cost of my dignity. I'm done being the good wife who stays quiet while you do whatever you want. I looked at Linda. And you're welcome to him. Because the man standing in front of you is the same man who'll do to you exactly what he did to me. He'll use you until someone younger or more convenient comes along. That's who he is. Linda looked like she wanted to disappear. She grabbed her purse. I don't have to listen to this. You're right, Sharon said. You don't. The door's right there. Linda looked at Bob, waiting for him to defend her, to say something. But Bob was staring at the floor, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. After a moment, Linda turned and walked out. The door slammed behind her. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I think, Pastor Williams said quietly, that most of us should leave now. Give the Thompsons some privacy. People started moving toward the door, but not before stopping to speak to me. Mary hugged me tightly. Call me anytime, honey. Anytime at all. The Johnsons told me I was brave. Mrs. Peterson from church invited me to lunch. One by one they filed out, offering me support, offering me sympathy, offering me nothing but cold shoulders and disappointed looks for Bob. When the last guest had left, only Grace, Sharon, Mr. Chen, and Tom Henderson remained. And Bob, standing in the middle of the living room that had once been his kingdom, looking lost. I think it's time for you to leave, Bob, I said quietly. This is my house. Actually, Sharon said, as of 3 hours ago it's not. The emergency motion to freeze assets was approved yesterday. All marital property is under court protection until the divorce is finalized. And Maggie's lawyer has advised that you need to vacate the premises. Bob's eyes widened. You can't. I can, and I have. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out 2 suitcases I'd packed earlier. Your clothes, your toiletries, everything you need for a while. Grace will escort you out. Maggie, please. We can talk about this. We can work something out. No, Bob, we can't. I looked at him. This man I'd loved for most of my life, this man who'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. And I felt nothing but pity. You made your choice. You chose Linda. You chose deception. You chose yourself over our marriage. Now you get to live with that choice. But where am I supposed to go? Maybe Linda will take you in. Or maybe you'll find out what it's like to be alone and scared and wondering how your life fell apart so quickly. I walked to the door and opened it. Goodbye, Bob. He stood there for a long moment, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then he picked up his suitcases and walked out. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, my legs suddenly weak. Grace wrapped her arms around me. You did it, Mom. You really did it? We did it. I corrected her. I couldn't have done it without all of you. Sharon came over and hugged us both. You were magnificent, Maggie. Absolutely magnificent. Mr. Chen patted my shoulder gently. My Martha would have been proud of you, Mrs. Thompson. Standing up for yourself like that. It takes real courage. I looked around my living room, my home, still decorated for a party that had gone nothing like planned. The caterers had left the food out. There were champagne glasses everywhere, half full, abandoned. It looked like a battlefield, but I was still standing. Bruised, exhausted, but standing. You know what? I said. I'm hungry. All that talking worked up an appetite. I looked at the spread of food the caterers had left. Anyone want to help me eat $200 worth of shrimp cocktail? Grace laughed, and then we were all laughing, the tension breaking like a fever. We sat down in my living room and ate party food and talked about lawyers and court dates and new beginnings. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt free. The weeks after the party were a blur of legal proceedings, paperwork, and difficult conversations. But through it all, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was as if I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there, and now it was finally gone. Miss Blackwell was as good as her word, with all the evidence we'd gathered. The credit card statements, Mr. Chen's documentation, the financial records showing Bob's hidden accounts. She built a case that left Bob with very little room to maneuver. He tried to fight it at first. His lawyer sent letters claiming I was being unreasonable, that I was letting my emotions cloud my judgment, that we should split everything 50-50 despite his affair. Ms. Blackwell's response was swift and devastating. She laid out every piece of evidence, every lie, every dollar he'd hidden. She made it clear that if Bob wanted to drag this out, she was more than happy to take it to trial, where all his financial improprieties would become public record. Bob settled 2 months later. I got the house. I got 70% of our retirement savings, including the money he'd tried to hide. I got alimony for the next 10 years, and I got my dignity back. Bob got Linda. Though I heard through the grapevine that their relationship didn't last long. Turns out, Linda wasn't interested in a man whose reputation was ruined and whose bank account was considerably smaller than she'd expected. She left him 3 months after the party for a different senior partner at a different firm. I should have felt satisfaction at that. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the years we'd wasted. Sad for the man Bob had become. Sad for who we both could have been if he'd chosen honesty instead of deception. But I didn't dwell on it. I had too much living to do. Grace moved back home for a few months while I adjusted to living alone. It was wonderful having her there, like getting back all the time we'd lost when Bob had kept us apart. We stayed up late talking, watching movies, cooking together in my yellow kitchen. One night, about 3 months after the party, we were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. I'd started gardening again, really gardening, not just keeping things alive but creating something beautiful. The flower beds were bursting with color. "Mom," Grace said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret it? Staying with Dad as long as you did?" I thought about it carefully. It would have been easy to say yes, to regret all those years I'd wasted being the good wife. But the truth was more complicated than that. "I regret that Bob wasn't the man I thought he was," I said slowly. "I regret that I didn't see the signs sooner. But I don't regret the life I built, even if it was built on a false foundation. I don't regret you. I don't regret the students I taught, the friends I made, the person I was trying to be." I looked at her. "I just regret that I thought being a good wife meant making myself smaller. That's the only part I'd change. I'd have made sure I stayed whole." Grace took my hand. "You're whole now." "I am," I agreed. And I was. For the first time in my adult life, I felt complete all by myself. Mr. Chen became one of my closest friends. We had coffee together most mornings, sitting on his porch or mine, watching the neighborhood wake up. Chester would snooze at our feet while we talked about everything and nothing. Books, politics, memories of the people we used to be. "You know what I admire about you, Margaret," he said one morning. "You didn't let what happened make you bitter. You could have. God knows you had reason to be." I thought about it, I admitted. But bitterness is just another kind of prison. I'd been in prison long enough. He nodded thoughtfully. "Martha used to say that too. After her diagnosis, after we knew she didn't have long, she refused to be angry about it. She said every day she wasted being angry was a day she wasn't living." He smiled, though his eyes were sad. "I try to remember that. To live, not just exist. That's what I'm trying to do too," I said. And I was. I joined a painting class at the community center. I started volunteering at the library, reading to children twice a week. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. I traveled, short trips at first, but I was planning a longer one to Italy in the spring. Something I'd always wanted to do but Bob had never been interested in. I was building a life that was mine. Just mine. And it was beautiful. Sharon invited me to Thanksgiving dinner at her house. It was a small gathering, just her husband James, Grace, and me. No drama, no tension, just family. "I have some news," Sharon said as we were clearing the dishes. "Tom Henderson is retiring. He's selling his share of the firm." "Good for him," I said. "The interesting part," Sharon continued with a smile, "is what he's doing before he retires. He's filing a formal complaint with the state accounting board about Bob's business practices. Turns out those emails he had, they're more damaging than we thought. Bob could lose his license." I stopped mid-reach for a plate. "Sharon, I know what you're going to say. That you don't want revenge, that you just want to move on." She touched my arm gently. "And I respect that, Maggie, I do. But this isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. Bob has been cutting corners for years, and eventually that catches up with you. Tom is just making sure it catches up before Bob hurts someone else." I thought about that. About other women who might fall for Bob's lies. About other families that might be destroyed. About justice versus vengeance. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay." Grace hugged me from behind. "You're a good person, Mom. Better than most people would be in your situation." "I'm just trying to be the person I want to see in the mirror," I said. It was a cold December afternoon when I saw Bob for the last time. I was coming out of the grocery store and he was going in. We almost walked right past each other before he stopped. "Maggie, Bob." He looked older, thinner. There were deep lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked tired. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm well, you?" "I'm managing." He shifted his grocery basket from one hand to the other. I heard you're taking a trip to Italy. I am. In March, that's good. You always wanted to go there. He paused, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. Maggie, I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong. About all of it. I looked at this man who had been my husband, my partner, my whole world for 42 years. I waited to feel something. Anger, sadness, even satisfaction at his apology. But all I felt was a distant kind of peace. I appreciate you saying that, Bob. Do you think you could ever forgive me? I thought about forgiveness. Real forgiveness, not the kind I'd practiced for years where I swallowed my hurt and pretended everything was fine. Real forgiveness meant acknowledging the wrong, feeling the pain, and then choosing to let it go, not for the other person but for yourself. I already have, I said, and realized it was true. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I forgive you, Bob, and I hope you find a way to forgive yourself. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I can. That's your journey, I said gently. Not mine, not anymore. I walked past him to my car, and I didn't look back. On New Year's Eve, Grace threw a party at my house. Not a big affair like the disastrous celebration party, just a small gathering of the people who mattered. My book club friends, Mr. Chen, Sharon and James, Pastor Williams and his wife, the Johnsons from next door. We ate good food, drank champagne, and counted down to midnight surrounded by laughter and love. When the clock struck 12, Grace raised her glass. To new beginnings, to new beginnings, we all echoed. Mary from book club hugged me tight. You know what, Maggie? You're an inspiration. To all of us. You showed us that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I just did what I had to do, I said. No, Mr. Chen said quietly. You did what most people are too afraid to do. You chose yourself. That takes extraordinary courage. Later, after everyone had gone home and Grace had left to spend the rest of the night with friends her own age, I stood in my kitchen, my sunny yellow kitchen, and looked around at my home. It was quieter now, emptier in some ways, but it was mine. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. The good wife who made coffee every morning without question. The woman who'd convinced herself that loneliness was just part of marriage. The woman who'd accepted less than she deserved because she thought that's what love required. That woman was gone. In her place was someone I was still getting to know. Someone stronger, braver, more complete. Someone who knew that being alone didn't mean being lonely. Someone who understood that love, real love, didn't require you to disappear. I poured myself a glass of champagne and walked out to the back porch. The night air was cold and clear, and I could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Somewhere out there, Bob was probably alone, maybe regretting his choices, maybe not. Linda was probably with her next target, weaving her next web. The world was full of betrayals and broken promises and people who would hurt you if you let them. But the world was also full of second chances, of daughters who forgave their mothers, of neighbors who documented evidence because they believed in justice, of lawyers who fought for women who'd been wronged, of friends who stood by you even when things got messy. The world was full of new beginnings, if you were brave enough to reach for them. I raised my glass to the stars, to the new year, to the woman I'd become and the woman I was still becoming. To Margaret Thompson, I whispered. May she never forget her worth again. And somewhere in the cold December air, I swear I heard my own voice whisper back, never again. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and went to bed in my home, in my room, in my life that was finally, completely, and beautifully my own. The food at Bob's celebration party had smelled like betrayal, but the life I'd built from the ashes, that smelled like freedom. They say the first year after a major life change is the hardest. They say you'll feel lost, that you'll doubt your decisions, that you'll wake up some mornings wondering if you made a terrible mistake. They were wrong. The first year after I divorced Bob Thompson was the best year of my life. I took that trip to Italy in March. I walked through the streets of Rome, ate gelato in Florence, watched the sunset over the canals of Venice. And I did it all by myself, without having to check in with anyone, without having to worry about someone else's preferences or schedule or comfort. I came home with a camera full of photos and a heart full of joy. Grace got engaged in June to a wonderful man named David who treats her like she hung the moon. When she introduced him to me, the first thing he said was, "Mrs. Thompson, Grace talks about you all the time, about how brave you are, you're kind of her hero." I cried at that. Good tears. Mr. Chen passed away peacefully in his sleep in August. I was the one who found him, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch with Chester at his feet. He looked peaceful, like he was just sleeping. At his funeral, I told everyone about how he'd helped me, how he'd documented everything because he believed people deserved the truth. He was a good man, I said, and I'm grateful I got to know him. I adopted Chester. He sleeps at the foot of my bed now, snoring softly, keeping me company. Sometimes I swear he looks at me like he knows I saved him from the shelter, and he's grateful. But the truth is, we saved each other. I started teaching again, not full-time, but volunteering at the after-school program at my old elementary school. The children don't know my story, don't know about the betrayal and the party and the divorce. They just know me as Mrs. Thompson, who reads them stories and helps them with their homework, and always has butterscotch candies in her pocket. That's enough. Sharon and I have lunch every Tuesday. We've become close in a way we never were before, and she's told me more than once that she wished she'd fought harder to stay in my life 5 years ago. You couldn't have known? I tell her, none of us did. But I should have, she always says. Family doesn't give up on family. She's teaching me that now. What family really means. Not obligation or duty or maintaining appearances, but showing up, being present. Telling the truth even when it's hard. As for Bob, I hear things occasionally. He lost his accounting license just as Sharon predicted. He's working as a financial consultant now, making a fraction of what he used to make. He's been through 2 more relationships since Linda, both brief, both ending badly. I don't take pleasure in his struggles, but I don't lose sleep over them either. He made his choices, and now he lives with the consequences. That's not my burden to carry anymore. The house on Maple Street is still mine. I've redecorated, new curtains, new furniture, new paint on the walls. Not yellow anymore, but a soft blue, gray that makes me feel calm. I've turned Bob's old office into an art studio where I paint in the mornings when the light is best. I'm not very good at painting yet, but I'm getting better. And more importantly, I enjoy it. That's enough. People in town treat me differently now, not with pity but with respect. Women my age stop me in the grocery store to tell me their own stories of betrayal, of finding courage, of starting over. I listen to them, and sometimes I give advice, and sometimes I just hold their hands and tell them, "You're stronger than you know. You'll survive this. You'll do more than survive, you'll flourish." Because I did. On the anniversary of the party, as everyone now calls it, Grace threw me a real celebration. A celebration of me, of my courage, of my new life. She invited all the people who'd stood by me. Sharon, the book club ladies, the Johnsons, Pastor Williams, Tom Henderson, even the lawyer, Miss Blackwell. We ate good food, drank good wine, and told stories. And when Grace raised her glass at the end of the night, she said, "To my mother, who taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself. Who showed me that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up. Who proved that a woman's worth isn't determined by who loves her, but by how she loves herself." Everyone cheered and clinked glasses, and I sat there surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, and I thought this is what I was missing all those years. Not a husband who pretended to love me. Not a marriage held together by duty and habit. But this, real connection, real friendship, real love that didn't require me to disappear to receive it. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in my living room, the same room where Bob had tried to replace me, where I'd found my voice, where everything had changed, and I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had forced me to grow. Gratitude for the betrayal that had set me free. Gratitude for the ending that had become my beginning. I walked upstairs to bed, Chester padding along behind me, and I fell asleep quickly and peacefully, without any of the anxiety or dread that used to fill my nights. And when I woke up the next morning, the first thing I thought wasn't about making coffee for someone else, or preparing someone else's breakfast, or managing someone else's day. The first thing I thought was, what do I want to do today? And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not the house I'd kept, or the money I'd won, or even the dignity I'd reclaimed. The real victory was this: after 68 years of living for other people, I'd finally learned to live for myself. And let me tell you something, it was glorious.